Welcome to the Unfeigned Faith Podcast, where our desire is to encourage each other to live out genuine Christianity in a superficial world. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Now here's our host, Pastor Karrie Richert.
Thanks for being with us on this episode of this podcast. And today I have a very special guest with us, my favorite person in the whole world, my wife, Karrie Richert. And it's actually kind of a rerun. Since the coronavirus hit, I've been doing a daily broadcast, Bible study. And it kind of started off as an in-depth Bible study. I've been kind of shortening it and trying to keep people's attention. But we were going through verse by verse through the book of Colossians and came upon a portion of Scripture about husbands and wives and family relations. And so I thought I'd bring my wife in for some perspective. When you start talking about wives submitting to your husbands, we can get all kinds of responses. And so I wanted to bring in her perspective on this as we talk about this. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this podcast.
I got my wife with me today because it's a very sensitive subject. And many of you might tune me out at this point, but we are following verse by verse, and we have to deal with the verse. So we're in Colossians 3, and I want to encourage you, ladies in particular, to hear us out as we look at the Word of God. This is not a hard passage. It's not one of those that's hard to interpret. What is God really saying here? It's our job to listen to what God has to say. And so that's my preface. Now you're like, boy, what's he going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about husbands and wives. And God's going to talk about it, actually. And we're prayerfully going to try to handle it right. And so I brought my wife with me, and she submitted, said, yes, I will do it with you. And but I appreciate her perspective on things, and I think she'll be a blessing to us today. With Colossians 3. Now remember, everything we're doing, it's one thing that's being addressed in Colossians is that Christ would have the preeminence. And with that, a couple of verses ago, we saw that let the word of Christ dwell in you. And we're talking about putting on that new man, and these are all outcomes. These are all expressions of the new man. And so when we come to some of these passages and we're at odds with this, we got to ask ourselves, am I living in the new man? Have I put this on? So the old man is in rebellion. The old man doesn't like God's ways. He's at odds with it. And so these are some things of the new man, and we're going to look at a little bit of how God created some things. God's order, all right? So it says in Colossians 3, verse number 18, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as it is fit in the Lord. And we'll pause there. This next chunk, really, it's all about relationships. Family relationships, and then it's going to get down to boss, employee, employer relationships, and things. And interestingly, we don't have in there friend relationships, because those really don't need a lot of instruction. When you hit it off with somebody, we're your friends. The Bible does talk a lot about one another's and things, but these are some of the ones that we need some commands. We need some instruction laid out. So I'm gonna break down a little bit of what these words mean. Then I'm gonna ask my wife a couple questions here and get some thoughts there. But he says, wives, submit yourselves. The word there, submit, it really means, it's a two-part word there in the Greek, and it means under an order or a position. And really what God's giving us here is like an organizational flow chart. You have, the boss, managers, employees rather, and you have a flow chart, or, in the military, you've got your chain of command. And it's kind of what he's given. And so this woman is placed under a position, under an order. And it's interesting there, it says unto your own husband. That means stay in your own chain of command. Don't jump out of the chain of command. And unfortunately, I've seen this violated on both sides. I've seen wives going to other men for advice and counsel. And by the way, there are times where you need maybe pastoral counsel or some of those kinds of things. I'm not talking about that, but really, and even that we got to be careful. The scriptures does talk about go ask your husband, and then if he doesn't have the answer, what can he do? He can come and talk to the pastor, and so he can keep that leadership role, so to speak. We want to be careful not to sidestep there, but But it says unto your own husband. It's amazing, sometimes a woman might be in rebellion to her husband, but she'll listen to the cop when he pulls her over. There's an authority, but make sure your own husband. And then as it is fit in the Lord. Now, I want to say this. This is why you ought to be so careful in who you marry. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says, be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Now, there is a yoking, there is an equality that should be complementary in the relationship. Unfortunately, there are times whether you get saved after you're married, or maybe you went into the thing violating some principles, and now you got to deal with these. And there are some wonderful helps scripturally on how to handle those. But I want to start off, for those who have not made the decision yet, to be very careful, be prayerful, get counsel, because this is a life sentence. Right? It is. But I hate to put it in those terms, but it is till death do us part. And we want to make sure we have the right foundation. So at some point you get to choose who you're going to be under, but then you got to stay under. Okay. Now, what do you do, Karrie, if a woman has an unsaved husband? Let's start there.
Well, the Bible doesn't give us any conditions for a different set of guidelines if your husband is saved or unsaved.
Yeah.
You have the same rules apply. Even if it's a saved husband but an ungodly husband, bad decision-making husband, you still follow their leadership.
Yeah.
With limitations, but you've followed their leadership.
Yeah. And then there's got to be a moral aspect to it, but the reality is, he may make dumb decisions. He may be notorious for dumb decisions. You follow and you support, and you be that help meet for him, that helper that's fitting for him. You were still made for him, that lost man. And the Bible talks about in other areas, it addresses this. You might win him over with your chaste conversation. How well are you displaying Christ to that lost husband, or vice versa, a husband to a lost wife. But I think it's very, very important to understand that we're representing Christ, and this is unto the Lord. This is still his structure. Saved, unsaved. By the way, I could give a lost person all the principles of the Bible, and some things are going to go a lot better in his life because they're God's principles, really. And whether it be finance, whether it be the home, and I want to say, I'm going to sound like a chauvinist now. The feminist movement has done more damage to the home in our society, and it's crept into the church. I'll give you, for instance, a guy wants to, is asked he's approached at church, hey, can you come over this afternoon and help us with the project? And he says to him, tongue in cheek, yeah, let me go check with the boss. Everybody knows exactly what he meant. His wife. He wasn't talking about his literal boss. And by the way, you're not hearing a woman necessarily say that about her husband. I mean, it'd be a rare occasion. And why is that? Why do we have that kind of mentality? Now, should he, he shouldn't have to check with her about anything. I'd say that's equally as wrong. You need your one flesh, and many times in many families, the wife is the planner. She's the organizer. She's making lunch, and you don't show up for lunch. Guess what? You're in trouble, buddy. But there's an aspect of, out of respect and love, you're going to say, hey, so and so needed some help today. Do you see any conflict with that? I think I'm going to go give him a hand. And guess what? She's in the loop now. That's completely different than saying, sweetheart, can I get your permission? Is it okay if I, and sometimes I think some wives will outwardly look like they're submitting, but they're subtly manipulating and kind of like, I'm showing him how he is going to lead us. And in essence is leading the leader. And we're going to be careful with that. Karrie, what would you say to a wife that comes to you for counsel and says, well, I'd be glad to submit if he would start leading? Because I've come across that. And it's a common thing.
I would say generally that's a cop-out. At some point, he was probably shown by the wife that he's not allowed to lead. Naturally, I think just about any man is naturally going to try to take some leadership, at least in the beginning. But when he is shut down, when he's made to pay for it later, like the guy says one day that he's gonna go and help somebody at the church with a project, whatever. But the wife says, "Well, I had plans. I need you to come home." She could say, "Oh, fine, whatever, fine, that's fine." And then when he gets home, she's like, "Well, I'm just leaving for the day too then." And she'll make him pay for it, or he gets the silent treatment or things like that. He's going to take a step back to avoid the conflict. And you do that enough times, and he's just going to step back and shut down.
Yeah. No, yeah, and that's absolutely true. Now, there are men that just their personality, they don't want to take the leadership, and the Bible doesn't say that he should be the leader of the home. It says that he is, and there are good leaders and bad leaders. Now, a good wife, the expression behind every good man is a good wife. And there's a lot of truth to that, because she is the completer, she is the helper, and she is going to support him. And I think it takes wisdom, ladies, but to get behind your husband and to help encourage him to take the lead. That's different than what I said earlier about manipulating the leadership, but to encourage him, maybe ask questions. What do you think, honey? Maybe you can take the extra effort to lay it all out so he can make a decision. Like you're teaching your children how to pick out their outfit. You lay it clothes out.
I think I could kind of speak to that, because in the early years, you were not at all really a decision maker. You're always the quiet one.
I go with the flow,
and I'm kind of a quiet one too, but I don't like when there's silence, and so I always kind of step up to fill in the gaps. And I realized a few years into our marriage that I was doing that all the time, and so it was making you stay quiet more, because I think you kind of relied on me answering people's questions for you and things like that. You would hesitate, so I would jump in and answer. So at some point, I think I would, even when someone would ask us a question, I think I would kind of physically step back a little bit and look at you like, go ahead.
You got this.
But I've done that a lot of times. I think sometimes men need to be encouraged to step up and lead a little more, because maybe they're afraid of the response they're going to get, or what if I mess this up? They have a lot of pressure on them, and what if I mess up the whole family's future? What if I make a bad decision? So I've done that, where I laid it out, or I might ask you first, hey, what do you think we should do? Oh, I don't know. So okay, well, here I'll kind of on my own. Here are some options, and well, if we do this, we'd have to take care of this, and here's some options. Now what do you think?
Yeah.
I might get a little more response. Okay, let's think about what it would take. And
well, the reality is, it's always good for us to get pushed out of our comfort zone a little bit. That's life. We're learning to grow together, and I didn't marry a manager. I married the wife that God gave me, and if man finds a wife, he finds a good thing. The marriage that God had blessed, it's a great thing, and we shouldn't look at it like a job title. And unfortunately, I think some relationships kind of we have it works the way we do it, but I appreciate that insight. I didn't know that's what you were doing.
And look at you now.
but honestly, to push, and she wasn't trying to persuade necessarily her ideas or her decisions, but saying, we need a decision, and I want you to lead, and I'm here to bounce things off of, and we can work through this together and even come to a decision together. But at the end of the day, husband, you need to lead. And even in those little things like a public setting where a question is asked us, by her stepping back and saying, you answer this, that's a very physical, that's showing submission and leadership. Now, what is or here's something to ask when we look at this. What is a man's greatest need? Does a man need to be loved? Does a man need money? Does a man need, what is his greatest need? And I think there's so much insight, the way God worded the scriptures, both in Ephesians 5 and here in Colossians, when he tells the wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. A man needs to know that he's respected. A man needs to know that he's followed. The tough thing about leadership is if he who leads and no one follows is just taking a walk. And he needs to know. And I'm going to add something to it. By the way, did you want to say anything about unto the Lord? Or did we kind of cover that? All right. Because this kind of is going to go into the husband's part here.
Yeah, sure. Disagreements are a big problem when you're, you set out to do your best with submitting to your husband, and you have really good intentions, and then he just has a really stupid idea, and it's not a sin to disagree with anyone. The sin comes in your attitude when you disagree. It's perfectly fine, and I mean, you need to have discussions about things that you disagree about, right?
Absolutely.
But just like you would want anyone to talk to you about something they disagree with you about, you have a respectful conversation, and maybe it's a very passionate conversation. Doesn't mean you need to scream and yell about it, but make your case, show them your side of view, or your side of things, and but at the end of the day, just like with your employer, if he disagrees at the end, he makes the decision and that's it, and you don't walk away from that bad mouthing them or complaining to the kids, undermining that authority in any way. That's the decision. And as unto the Lord, just like if it was Jesus telling you, you would say, yes, Lord, we're gonna do it your way, and you go off and you do it his way wholeheartedly. God will reward you for that, even if there are negative consequences based on the bad decision. You have protected yourself really in keeping yourself under the umbrella of God's will and God's plan for the order of things. And even with bad consequences, Romans 8:28 and 29 still are in effect, that God will take all of those things and work them together for the good of you and your family, making everybody more like Jesus. You're going to have more experience and ways to make better decisions in the future.
Yeah. One of the powerful layouts that's given by Paul as he writes to the church at Corinth, he talks about how in 1 Corinthians 11, in verse 3, he says, I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of every woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. And so you see this idea that you have the head of Christ is God, and then God the man, and then man the wife, and you kind of have this again this organizational flow chart, but it's a flow of protection, it's a flow of authority.
It's good that the Bible puts that in there to show that the man doesn't just run off and do whatever he wants. He is under authority also.
Absolutely.
He also has to submit to Christ, and even lets us know that Jesus Christ himself submits to God the Father.
Yeah, and he's answerable for that. Just like just like when you have a flow, you've got maybe the boss gives some instruction to a manager. The manager has an employee do something contrary to what the head boss wanted, all right? And he goes to that man and says, why did you do this way? And he says, well, my manager said such and such. You were in the clear because you obeyed, and again, unless it's a moral, a legal thing, there are some aspects of legally, I would not do certain things because of legality. But he's going to go and correct the manager, and so Christ has a way of dealing with the husband, and you need to be in your part. We're not going to get as far as I was hoping to get on this, but let me just introduce the husbands, and maybe we'll pick this up tomorrow. It says, "Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them." Now, I want to say this: that there are two imperatives in this for the two commands. The first one, love your wives. Second one, be not bitter. You have a positive, you have a negative. And so as we look at this, that love, it comes from the form of the word agape, which is we could call that like a godly love. It's a heart love. It's a love that's an action. It shows. It sacrifices. It's a love put to action, and we might say it this way: unconditional. A great word for that. Unconditional. No matter what, you love. And I want to say this is what I kind of started getting at before I asked about the unto the Lord. What a man needs is really unconditional respect. Boy, you want to undermine your husband and you want to draw him to bitterness, disrespect him, especially when he makes a bad decision. See, you bonehead, if you just, you see, you belittle your husband, you be careful. You are going to destroy that marriage.
It takes a lot of work to make up for that.
It does. And on the flip side, a woman's greatest need is to know that she's loved. She has no problem unconditionally loving. She loves her children. She commits to the marriage, and she, as a part of that, that's a natural thing. And what she needs to know: am I loved? Does he love me? And so this is something. Now, this is interesting. How many times have people come to us? I just don't love her anymore. We're just not in love anymore. And honestly, when it's a man, I'll deal differently with a man than I do with a woman, okay, in the counseling office. But sometimes men just need to be smacked upside the head, okay? So I'm going to pray for you with a 2x4, brother. But I'll say, what does that have to do with anything? Because, remember I said it's an imperative. That means it's a command. Husbands, command from God, love your wives. What does a feeling have to do with you obeying? Yeah. You're just saying, I just don't feel like obeying anymore. Okay, well now at least we have the problem, because remember under Christ, you are now in direct disobedience to Christ. And if he is to have the preeminence in all things, if he is to guide, if we've put on the new man, if Christ is, the word of Christ is dwelling in us richly, then we have one option. That is to obey. And if there's something in me that is not allowing me to love my wife, I need to fix it because I'm disobeying. Which is why the next part of the command comes along. Be not bitter against them. The reason I'm having trouble acting out this command to love, again, it's a command and it's an action. I love her with things. I love her with words. I love her with, and they're all an outflow of the heart. And so what am I doing to meet her needs? And here's really, let's take it to its full extreme. To agape, my wife, is to meet her needs regardless of anything she does or says to me. That's extreme. Well, didn't we just put on the wife? You ought to submit to him regardless of how stupid the decision is. Well, go ahead.
And also, I think you said unconditional respect.
Yeah.
But don't we hear all the time that respect has to be earned?
You do, yeah.
What would happen to a soldier who didn't think much of his officer, and so he didn't salute when the officer walked by?
Right.
It's like you may not always, as the wife, deserve to be loved or taken care of. Maybe you just had a really bad day and you were not being a very nice person, and maybe you don't deserve to be outwardly loved that day, but there's no condition provided for in that case. It's the same in the reverse, as the wife has a responsibility to respect the husband regardless of whether or not he earns it.
So if I'm struggling in this, I need to find out there is a root of bitterness that has come in somewhere. What has caused me to be bitter against my wife, which is keeping me from loving her unconditionally? Okay. And it says, be not bitter against them. I've seen so many men, they get to the point, you watch them, you see it in their face. They're bitter against their wife. They're with her. They have not divorced her. Wonderful. But they're bitter. They're cold. Yeah, they don't respond well. They begin to get critical. And we'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, husbands. But let's kind of chew on this today, husbands and wives. Husbands, love your wives. It's a command from God. And it's seeking out, how can I best meet your needs? How can I do better today than I did yesterday? Regardless of if she, I'm not going to give a bunch of examples because I'm going to get myself in trouble. But regardless of how she responds, and then wives, let your husbands know how much you appreciate them, how much they sacrifice for their family. Let them know that you notice that. Let your husband lead. Encourage him. Sit down and have a heart-to-heart. If you found yourself taking charge, taking control too much, I believe that's part of the curse of Eve. The Bible says that her desire will be towards her husband. I believe that's the desire to usurp authority is what it's talking about there. She wants to be in charge, and you see this struggle. I'll tell you what, men will step aside. They'd rather live in harmony, and rather than have a conflict. And so maybe even have a heart-to-heart with your husband.
You might need to say, I really struggle with this, and I'm gonna try to do this. I want you to make a decision and just be patient with me while I really practice stepping back.
Yeah, push that reset button with him and say, we're starting over, and I want you to lead, and I want to be. I'll do everything I can to give you what you need to lead, and but I want you to lead, and we'll talk through things and just it's good to have those moments, because we're creatures of habit. We'll get a good idea, all right, I'm going to change, and we fall right back into it. And so keep the discussion open and talk about it, pray together, and let's get things in God's order. Remember, this is God's organizational flow chart for a successful home, for a successful family. You get things out of order. Listen, anything with two heads is a monster, or you get the heads out of order. What if one of the managers steps into the CEO's office one day and say, I'm gonna take charge of things today. Why don't you go and do my job for a while? It's not gonna fly, and he doesn't know what a lot of problems there. But let's keep things in God's order. Remember, this is all part of the fall. This is all part of the rebellious nature that's in us. And if we're putting on Christ, the new man, it doesn't have to make sense. And let me just say this: it doesn't have to be socially acceptable. This is going live, and boy, I might just get blasted by anyone that's going to come across it. Look at this guy, he thinks, these are God's thoughts. Again, this is not a hard passage. This is a passage that we just got to take it for what it says and apply it to our lives.
And once you start doing the right thing, and who's going to start doing their part first, just break the cycle. Submit to him even if he's not that loving. Husband, love your wife even if she's not that respectful. But once you break that cycle, it is so much easier to respect a loving husband, and it is so much easier, isn't it, to love a respectful wife.
Absolutely.
And once you start feeding that in the right direction, it just builds and builds, and it's a wonderful marriage.
It really is. There is harmony there. A great book on this I recommend is called Love and Respect. Who's the author? Do you remember?
I do not know.
Okay, Love and Respect. You can find it on Amazon, and they're not giving me anything for making that plug, but I thought I'd throw that out there because it really digs into that concept very well, on how men and women have different perspectives on things and how they perceive things, and it's very, very helpful and insightful. But I'd recommend that. Well, we only touched on 2 verses today, but we got in kind of deep. But I sure appreciate you all, and thank you for tuning in. I've got some just encouraging emails and people I've never met just being blessed and helped by this, and I sure appreciate every one of you. And just thank you so much for tuning in and our time together. If you need anything, please reach out. Got questions, comments, you disagree, bring it. We're glad to address it. We love to do that. But I sure appreciate you all. And until next time, God bless.
We hope this episode was a blessing to you. If you have any questions, comments, topic suggestions, or even disagreements, Aaron would love to hear from you. Please feel free to contact him at www.unfeigned.life. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And remember 1 Timothy 1:5. Now the end of the commandment is charity out of a pure heart, and of a good conscience, and of faith unfeigned. Until next time, keep your faith real to the glory of God.